now. All right. Well, a couple more people coming into the waiting room. And I think we're just about there. We'll get started here in a second. All right. Well, for those of you who just joined, just to reintroduce myself, my name is Jason Vorderstrasse. I'm the diplomat in residence for the Department of State for Southern California, Hawaii, Nevada, American Samoa, Guam, and the Northern Mariana Islands, which basically means I'm the recruiter. And thank you all today for joining this Trojan Talk. And I'm joined by another diplomat in residence, public diplomacy diplomat in residence at USC, Joelle Uzarski. So Joelle, thanks for coming today.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure. And I want to thank some of my students for being here because we get to see each other in person, but we're always behind masks. So it's kind of nice to see your whole faces. There's construction happening next door here and it's really loud. So when I'm not talking, I'm going to be on mute.
Okay, great. So this is a Trojan Talk, as you know, so we'll be sharing information about careers in the Department of State, as well as some information on student programs. The way we'll do it is we'll have Joelle talk a little bit about her experiences in the Department of State, and then I will share with you some detailed information on how you can apply to our various programs. So I do have a PowerPoint, but we won't start out with that. We'll start out with the more interesting part, which is Joelle's experiences and her path to the Department of State and what she's done during that. So Joelle, with that, I'll turn it over to you. And just another reminder again that we are recording. So if you'd rather not be on video, that's certainly fine. But we're doing it so that way Career Services will have access to this video after this event for those people who are not able to attend today. So Joelle, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Jason. So in the State Department, we have 5 different areas of specialization, and I'm sure that Jason will maybe talk a little bit more about that. One of them is political, one is management, one is consular, one is economics, and one is public diplomacy. And I'm in that cone or specialization. And what public diplomacy does is we do the people-to-people relationships. We do that through messaging. I'm sorry about the banging. If it becomes really annoying, I'll switch to headphones and that'll make it a little bit better for you, I think. But we do, okay, so we engage with publics from an embassy or a consulate through messaging and through programming. And the messaging is like media, primarily interacting with journalists, engaging with on social media, a lot of messaging. And then the program side is usually considered sort of the cultural side. And that's where we do educational programs and cultural programs. I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a second, but just to give you a sense of how I got here to the State Department. My bachelor's degree is in creative writing and my master's degree is in applied linguistics, but you don't have to have a master's degree to join the State Department. In fact, I'm not even sure that you have to have a bachelor's degree, but Jason will clarify that for us. But it really doesn't matter what your majors were, what your degrees were in, as long as you have the qualities that the department considers essential for diplomats to have. Once you pass the tests and you get into the Foreign Service, thank you for that confirmation, then the State Department gives you training for the type of work that you're going to be doing. So Jason and I have colleagues who have come from international relations backgrounds and legal backgrounds, but then we also have colleagues who've come from education or from dentistry, or really kind of anything. It doesn't matter what your training is in. My first assignment with the State Department wasn't actually, this was before I joined the Foreign Service. I had a fellowship with the Department of State, and that fellowship took me to Uzbekistan for 2 years. It was then that I started taking the entrance exam. The first time I took the written exam, I didn't pass it. A lot of people don't pass it the first time. The second time I took it, I passed it, and then went through the cycles. I joined the Foreign Service officially in 2005. My first assignment was in Washington, D.C., and then I went to Chile. Most assignments overseas are 3 years in length, except for some of the countries where it's particularly either dangerous or difficult to live there, and those assignments are for a year. So I spent 3 years in Chile. Then I'm in Santiago, in the capital. The embassy is always in a capital, so that's why I've only lived in the capitals of the countries where I've served. I was for 3 years in Santiago, Chile. Then I moved to New Delhi. I was there for 3 years. Then I moved to Islamabad, Pakistan, where I was serving for a year. And then I moved to Bangkok, Thailand, and then to Brasilia, Brazil. And now I am a visiting scholar, visiting fellow at USC through next semester. Just last week, I got my onward assignment. So I know that I know where I'm going next. When I finish my time at USC, I'm going to move to Washington, D.C. to study Hebrew for a year. And then I'm going to be the cultural attaché in Tel Aviv. Hebrew will be my 8th foreign language. One of the things that's typical about Foreign Service officers is that we have to speak lots of languages. So I have studied a bunch of languages. The ones that I use most frequently are the ones that I remember, right? So my Spanish and my Portuguese, I use them a lot. So those are my strongest languages. I don't use my Thai very often, and I don't use my Hindi very often, for example. So those languages have definitely gotten rusty in my brain. For me, public diplomacy is the most interesting of the specializations, and Jason might have a different opinion, but I really like working with people. And so what I do in a day-to-day, my day-to-day work involves supervising or overseeing teams of amazing people who implement programs that advance US foreign policy objectives. So I'll give you an example just to sort of make that real. So one of the projects that I did, one of the programs that I did in Brazil before I moved to Los Angeles was a STEM education program. But the Foreign Service, we don't do STEM anymore. As of a couple of years, all of our STEM programs are STEAM programs because we incorporate the arts as well. And one of the priorities of the government of Brazil was, and I think maybe still is, to improve the quality of secondary level education. So they are making some reforms in secondary school curriculums, and they're emphasizing more the STEAM fields. And so we put together a program in the embassy in Brasilia for 100 high school students. They were all girls. Because we are interested in seeing more girls in the STEAM fields, and so is the government of Brazil. So this was a way that our foreign policies align. We identified 100 high school girls who were going to public schools that were really under-resourced. So these were girls that did not have an elite situation at all. They were underprivileged and with limited resources. And we collaborated with the local university, which is a very good university in Brasilia, to have mentors for these students. So our mentors were graduate students who were all in fields like biotechnology and engineering and other STEAM areas. So there were 100 girls and there were 20 graduate school mentors. And we started with a couple-day program in person. This was before the pandemic started, when all the 100 girls, plus their 20 mentors, plus the teachers that were at the schools that the girls came from, plus our team of trainers. So we all got together for a couple of days, 3 days, and we did in-person programming for the girls, which involved workshops, mostly workshops in coding languages and how to prepare a pitch and how to pitch an idea for a competition, all sorts of skills, and a lot of self-esteem building and confidence building and networking. So after the 3 days of in-person, then once a month, the girls would, they would interact regularly with their mentors, but once a month, they had a presentation or a workshop by some really amazing woman in the STEAM field. So like, for example, the CEO of IBM Brazil, a workshop for them. Another Dow, I think Dow Brazil has a female in its leadership role. So that woman engaged with the girls. And anyway, they got lots of input and lots of encouragement and support. And toward the end of the program, we held a hackathon where the girls needed to identify a problem in their community and propose a solution in the form of an app. And at the end, and it was a competition, and the 3 teams that had the most effective and the most like useful or applicable apps, each won $5,000 that they could put into the development of their app so that it could be actually created and used. And so that's one example of a kind of a program that an embassy would do in the area of public diplomacy in order to advance the foreign policy goals of the US, and especially when the foreign policy goals of the US and the host government align, then that's kind of the ideal situation. And so that's an example of a kind of a program that we would do. I will just stop talking by saying that I think that that public diplomacy is, like I mentioned at the beginning, like one of the more interesting components and areas of work that the State Department has in the Foreign Service, but there are others, and they're also equally fascinating to the people who do them. And maybe Jason will tell you a little bit more about that.
All right. Well, great. Thanks very much, Joelle. I appreciate that, detailed explanation of your own career. And I think it gives everyone a taste of what the Foreign Service is about. But as I mentioned at the beginning, I do now have a PowerPoint to kind of go through all of our different careers. And, along the way too, I did want to say, if anybody has questions, please go ahead and feel free to type them in the chat at any point. When I'm done with the presentation too, where I think we're a small enough group that, once I'm done, people can come off mute and just ask questions as well. So I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen. All right. And I'm going to be talking about both careers and student programs at the Department of State, but I'm going to start with the careers because the student programs generally lead to the careers. So the student programs make more sense if you understand what the careers are. So I have a lot of information in this, and I'm going to go somewhat quickly, but if there's more questions about them or you'd like me to go into more detail, please let me know. So the first thing I want to mention is that Joelle was talking about the Foreign Service, and I'm also a Foreign Service officer. I've been in for 17 years. And that's where a lot of the things I'm going to talk about today, a lot of those are in the Foreign Service, but we also have positions in the Civil Service. The main difference is that the Civil Service is primarily in the US, and most of the jobs in the Civil Service are in the Washington, D.C. area. And it's very much like applying for any other federal job. So if you're applying for a position, say at Department of Commerce or Department of the Interior, you see a position advertised on USA Jobs, it's in a specific location, it has specific requirements. If you meet those requirements, you can apply on USA Jobs and hopefully you'll be selected. The Foreign Service, on the other hand, you're applying to join the Foreign Service itself. You're not applying to a particular location. Sometimes people say to me, well, I'd like to apply for a job at the US Embassy in Paris. And My answer is, well, who wouldn't? But it doesn't work that way. You apply to join the Foreign Service, and exactly what you're going to do and where you will serve is determined later. And as Joelle mentioned, most of the positions are 2 to 3 years in length, although there are some which are 1 year. And typically in the Foreign Service, you will spend about half of your career overseas, or perhaps 2/3. It depends on, a bit on your personal preference, and we can go into more details on that later. But I've served overseas in Kingston, Jamaica, in Hong Kong, and in Tijuana, Mexico, and then in Washington, D.C. have had positions related to human rights, the United Nations, and Chile. So the Foreign Service is then split into several different categories. I want to talk first about Foreign Service specialists. These are 19 different careers for which you need to have a particular academic or work experience background, or sometimes both. These 19 different careers are in 8 different categories. They're not all open all of the time, but generally speaking, each of the positions will open up at least once per year. If you go to the link that's on the top of this slide, and I'll share that link too here in the chat in a minute, when you go to that link, you'll see next to each of the 19 different careers, you'll see a button that says "Keep me informed." And you can click on that button and it will automatically notify you when the position is open. Some of them, as I said, are open all the time or very frequently because we have high demand, and some a little bit less frequently. So with regard to business administration, office management, we have positions in human resources and accounting and logistics. Our office management specialist career, that's actually one of those that we have very high demand for. And we have a test which is offered throughout the year to become an office management specialist. The requirements to apply for that is if you have a bachelor's degree and 1 year of experience as an executive assistant or some sort of support role for a senior person in an organization, you're eligible to apply. We do have 2 engineering positions, the construction engineer, which you can see on the page here, as well as a security engineering officer position in our law enforcement security positions. The security office engineering officer actually requires nothing beyond an engineering degree to apply. IT is another priority area for us. So we have an information management specialist career where you're in charge of the IT infrastructure at our embassies and consulates around the world. And for that too, there is a test which is offered throughout the year. We also have, speaking of law enforcement, we have a diplomatic security special agent that if you have a bachelor's degree in any field and 1 year of work experience, you're eligible to apply. That's a position where you're in charge of embassies' relations with foreign law enforcement agencies when you're overseas, but also you investigate things like passport fraud, visa fraud, and human smuggling. We do have, as I said, many other positions. I won't go through them all, but if you have questions about any of them, please let me know. Most of those that I did not mention, though, have requirements of 3 to 5 years of experience. Now, Foreign Service Officer, that's what Joelle and I both are. And as I indicated in the chat, and Joelle mentioned too, there is no particular academic or work experience requirement to become a Foreign Service Officer. As long as you're 21 and a US citizen, you're eligible to join as a Foreign Service Officer. And as Joelle indicated, you do have to pick one of 5 career tracks. We used to call them cones, but now the terminology we're trying to use, but I still use cones on occasion myself, is career tracks. So you'll hear both. And to register for the Foreign Service Officer test, you have to not only select a career track, but then you also have to state, you also have to submit several essays. Sorry, I don't know what keeps on beeping here, but I'll try to, I don't know what's going on with that, with the beeping, but I'll try to figure it out. Sorry. So the Foreign Service Officer test is offered 3 times a year in February, June, and October. And then the career tracks, Joelle mentioned about public diplomacy in detail in particular, but consular, basically you're doing visa interviews and helping American citizens. Economic and political are both reporting tracks, which means you're writing reports on economic or political conditions in the country. And management is really the only one where you're not dealing as much with the public. Sometimes you might be, but not probably as much as the other 4. That's where you're basically in charge behind the scenes to make sure that our embassies and consulates are safe, that they meet occupational safety and health standards, that we have adequate housing, our budget office is working correctly, people are getting paid on time, the motor pool is operating, that kind of thing. I would also mention that for Foreign Service Officers, it's quite common to work outside of your career track. I've worked in 4 of the 5 myself. And everyone has to work in consular for at least 1 year. So unless you're a consular career track, you will certainly work outside of your career track during your career. Now, the last opportunity we have in the Foreign Service is the Consular Fellows Program. This is a program where you are doing visa interviews or helping American citizens overseas, similar to entry-level Foreign Service officers in the consular career track. This is the only Foreign Service opportunity that requires a language. You must speak Arabic, Chinese, Portuguese, or Spanish. You can only do this for a maximum of 5 years, but it is a good way to get an idea of what the Foreign Service is all about. And I would mention on the subject of languages, you can get extra points in the Foreign Service officer and Foreign Service specialist selection processes if you speak a language, but it's not a requirement. Now, to go back to the civil service just for a minute, as I said earlier, most of our civil service positions are in the Washington, D.C. area. I did want to flag here in particular the Pathways programs. Pathways internships are a great way to get into the civil service if you're either an undergraduate or graduate student, because you not only get paid while you're doing the internship, but then you can get non-competitive eligibility, which basically means you can move into a civil service position without having to go through the standard USA Jobs application process. Another great program is the Pathways Recent Graduates Program. This is set aside for people who have graduated within the last 2 years. You'll see the positions advertised on USA Jobs. Usually it'll call it Pathways or Recent Graduates or something similar to that. But it's a great way to reduce your competition, because for civil service, it's not uncommon to have several hundred applicants for one position. So anything you can do to cut down that number is going to be a plus for you. But it is only available within the 2 years of graduating either an undergraduate or a graduate degree. I don't know if we have any veterans joining us today, but if we do, I'm happy to go into more details about our veterans preferences. But the main thing is that we do have veterans preferences both for the civil service and the foreign service. Now, switching gears a bit, I want to talk about some of our fellowships. We have 3 fellowships on the Foreign Service side, all of which can help you pay for your education. The Foreign Affairs IT Fellowship pays up to $37,500 a year in tuition fees and living expenses for undergraduate or graduate studies in an IT-related field like cybersecurity or management information systems, or of course, computer science. Then you have a 5-year service commitment as an information management specialist. That's the job I mentioned earlier, where you're in charge of the IT infrastructure at our embassies and consulates around the world. Of course, you can stay longer than 5 years, and the Department of State typically has a pretty high retention rate among all federal agencies. For this program, if you're a sophomore and planning to enter a junior year in one of those programs, or if you're thinking about going to graduate school, if you're thinking about going to graduate school in an IT-related field, it doesn't matter whether you studied IT as an undergrad or not. But application deadline is January 31st. For fall of 2022, and it's typically in January. Our other two Foreign Service Fellowship programs, which are both graduate fellowships, are the Pickering and Wrangell Graduate Fellowship programs. These each pay up to $42,000 a year for 2 years in a field relevant to the Foreign Service. That could be an MBA, it could be a Master's of Science in Economics, or Master of Arts in International Affairs, something like that. You then do have a 5-year service commitment as a Foreign Service officer. The application deadlines for these are usually about a year in advance. So they were in mid-September this year for fall of 2022. And you don't have to be a senior when you're applying. You can be out of school for a while if you're thinking about going to graduate school later. Now, there are also 2 civil service fellowships I want to mention briefly. These do not include payment for graduate school, but are instead for people who have received a graduate degree. So that's a master's or a doctoral degree. The Presidential Management Fellowship leads to a 2-year paid fellowship program where you get to explore different parts of an agency or even different agencies, and then you move into a civil service position. The Veterans Innovation Partnership Fellowship is very similar, except it's only for 1 year that you're before you move into the permanent civil service position. And as the name suggests, it's only open to veterans. The deadlines for these 2 programs are both in mid-October, and they're only open to people who've received their graduate degree within the last 2 years. Another program I did want to mention is our English for Heritage Language Speakers program. This is an 8-month scholarship in Washington, D.C., where you also receive a monthly stipend, and then you have to work for the federal government for 1 year. It is open to U.S. citizens who are native speakers of the languages that you see on the screen. And as long as you have a bachelor's degree, the application period is March through July of each year. Now, I mentioned earlier about the Pathways internship program. There are 3 other internship programs that I wanted to quickly mention as well. The Virtual Student Federal Service is a virtual program that's been going on for many years. It is our fastest in terms of the selection process because it does not involve a security clearance. That does limit a bit what you can do, but you can put together things like this PowerPoint presentation. I have 5 Virtual Student Federal Service interns myself. And you work on projects remotely up to 10 hours a week. It is unpaid, but you do still learn a lot about the Department of State. The application deadline will be in July, and then you work during the academic year, September to May. It is open for undergraduate and graduate students. We also have the U.S. Foreign Service Internship Program. This is our paid internship program for undergraduates. The application deadline is about a year in advance. It's in late August. It's only open to rising sophomores or juniors or those who have just begun their sophomore or junior year in late August. And it involves 2 overseas paid internships, one in Washington, D.C., sorry, 2 paid internships, I should say, 1 overseas and 1 in Washington, D.C. Our largest internship program, which is open to both undergraduates and graduates, is the Student Internship Program. This is offered through the fall, spring, and summer. It's in Washington, D.C., places around the U.S. and as well around the world. This program, you apply about 6 to 9 months in advance. So I anticipate for fall of 2022 that the deadline will probably be in January. And it is unpaid. I'm going to talk in a minute about some of the ways you can help pay for it. But I also did want to mention that for some, there are local opportunities. So the Office of Foreign Missions has sometimes had which is in Los Angeles, has sometimes had internship opportunities as well as somewhat nearby, like in Tucson and San Francisco with the Diplomatic Security Service, their office is there. But I did also want to mention, I said at the beginning, I served in Tijuana. You're kind of uniquely located here in Southern California that you have a nearby overseas opportunity. And we never had enough applicants for the positions we had in Tijuana. And in Tijuana and in many other places around the world outside of Western Europe, we did provide housing. So even though it was unpaid, we could still house you. That's not always the case, but it is often the case outside of Western Europe. Now, there are, as I said, some ways to help pay for this. If you're an undergraduate student receiving a Pell Grant, you may want to consider the Gilman International Scholarship. This is a program that will pay up for study abroad or interning abroad. The deadline that's coming up next is March 1st. They usually have 2 deadlines each year in March and October, depending on when you're planning to go overseas. We also have scholarships for Paris, London, and Washington, D.C., administered by outside organizations. The main thing to know about these is if you apply for internships at those locations, to say that you're okay with the Department of State sharing your information with the organizations that administer those programs. Now, another way to get overseas is the Critical Language Scholarship. Joelle talked about the value of languages, and I absolutely agree. Language skills are important for anybody thinking about a foreign service career, regardless of what type of foreign service career that might be. And so this program, we will basically pay you to study abroad and learn a language or improve a language. The languages in purple are ones where you need to have some background, but those in the black text, you don't need to have any background in at all. The deadline was actually yesterday for next summer, but it is every year in mid-November. This is one of our few programs you can apply for as a senior or in your final year of graduate school, and it also has no GPA requirement. There are also the Boren Awards, which you can use to study abroad or conduct overseas research in regions critical to U.S. interests. And if you go to borenawards.org, you'll see what those regions are. These are both for undergraduates and graduates, and the deadlines are coming up on January 26th and February 2nd. Now, we have 2 programs that are designed to give you an introduction to what a foreign policy career is all about. The Wrangell Summer Enrichment Program is a 6-week program hosted by Howard University that includes some classes, travel, room and board, and a $3,200 stipend. This is for undergraduate students, but it includes graduating seniors. And during those 6 weeks, not only do you have the classes, but you'll meet with Department of State officials, you'll meet with staff of members of Congress, you'll meet with non-governmental organizations, visit different agencies like the U.S. Agency for International Development and U.S. Agency for Global Media to learn more about how foreign policy is conducted. The application deadline is coming up on February 15th of 2022. And then our final program that I'm going to talk about today is our Cox State Department Diplomacy Seminar. This is very similar to the Wrangell Summer Enrichment Program, except it does not include the classes, and it's only 1 week long. It's in October every year for undergraduate students. The application deadline will be in late August. This year and last year we did it remotely, but previous to that we would pay to fly people to Washington, D.C. And again, you would hear from senior Department of State officials, meet with staff of members of Congress and some of these other agencies as well, basically to learn about how foreign policy works. So this is my last slide of the presentation. We'll be moving on to Q&A, but I am pretty active on Facebook. You can see there, I'm at DIR SoCal. Mostly what I do there are video interviews of people through Facebook Live. And then of course the videos stay on my page. So you can go there and you'll see over 25 videos on various topics, including interviews with most of the jobs I talked about today. And in fact, tomorrow I'm actually hosting 2 Facebook Lives, one on the Office Management Specialist career, and then one on the Diplomatic Security Special Agent application process. So you can watch those videos if you're interested in getting even more details. Of course, we'll be happy to answer questions today too, but if you'd like to, hear from somebody who's actually doing those different jobs. And then in the red box, and I'll post this in the chat in a minute, is a tiny URL where if you'd like to stay in touch, you can go there and register. I send out a monthly newsletter that includes information, including my email address, but also includes information on my office hours, which I have several of each week, and I'm happy to talk to you individually. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing. And I will put in the chat various links, but if anybody has questions, either, put them in the chat, or as I said, I think we're a small enough group. If you want to come off mute and just ask them, that's fine with me too. Just as a reminder, we are still recording. If anybody wants to ask a question and not have it recorded, I guess I would just say, just hold off for a minute and we'll see if how many questions we have that people are okay with being recorded. And then we'll stop the recording and then answer whatever questions people might have that they don't want to have recorded. So if there are any questions that anyone feels comfortable asking now, or clarifications for me or Joelle, as I said, please either come off mute or put them in the chat. And while we're waiting to see if anybody has questions, I'll be putting some of those links in there too.
Go ahead, William.
Hi guys, thank you so much for the talk. It was really interesting. My question was just regarding the position of foreign service officer. You guys said that it wasn't a requirement to speak a language, but it was kind of like a benefit. And I'm just wondering, in both of your guys' cases, did you speak another language? And if so, which ones?
Joelle, you want to go first?
Sure, I would be happy to. So the advantage to speaking a foreign language pretty well is that if you've passed the exam, the written exam, the oral exam, and you've gotten your security clearance and your medical clearance, those are the 4 steps. Once you've passed through all of those 4 steps, your name goes on to something called the register. And the register is a list of people who are eligible to be hired. It doesn't mean that you get a job. It means that you're eligible. You've cleared through the whole process. And where you fall on the register is determined by your scores on the exams, I believe. Jason, you'll correct me if I'm wrong. Okay, but you can bump up your place on and they hire from the top down. Okay, so you can bump yourself up on the register with a language, and you can also bump yourself up on the register if you have done military service, if you have any sort of, if you're a veteran of some capacity, and I think you can bump up, but I'm not sure if you've done other federal government service. I'm not sure. Jason might know that. No, the answer to that is no. Okay, so if you have a language, that helps you get higher on that list. I think, let's see, when I joined, I had already studied Russian and I spoke Portuguese, but I don't know that helped me get hired or not. I don't, because when you're on the register, you only know where you are in terms of you're in the top third, you're in the middle third, or you're in the bottom third. So I don't know if those languages helped me. I have a colleague who really wanted to get into the Foreign Service, and she was really smart and amazing, but she wanted to increase her probability of getting hired. So she took Arabic classes for years, and she got good at Arabic. So when she passed all the Foreign Service exams, her Arabic score bumped her up, and she got hired faster than she thinks some of her peers did. So I think that probably did help her. There are certain languages that are like the really hard languages that not lots of people speak, and those hard languages I think have more weight than the easier languages. You know, Spanish, Portuguese, French are probably more easy languages. Arabic, Mandarin, some of the other harder languages, Korean, Japanese, those would probably bump you up a little bit more because they're tougher and fewer native speakers of English speak them. William, did we answer your question? Did I answer your question with Jason's confirmations?
Yeah, I may just add too that as Joelle said, you know, you can get extra points for certain languages. And I put the link to that in the chat there. I know I've been putting a lot of links, but you'll see one that's right after the one I put on my Facebook page that shows the language bonus points. And if you go there, you'll see there's quite a lot of languages you can get bonus points for, but for most of them, you have to speak them at basically like a fluent, I mean, maybe not 100% fluent, but, you know, conversationally fluent, I guess you could say, level. But for certain ones like Arabic and Mandarin, you don't. So I came in with Mandarin and a little bit of Spanish. My Spanish was nowhere near good enough to get points, but you can only get it for one language anyway. But I did get extra points for Mandarin, and I do think that got me off the register faster and hired more quickly. So you know, having language skills can certainly help you as far as, you know, the speed of being hired. And I also think, you know, just in terms of understanding different cultures, that's, you know, still a useful thing, even if it's a language that isn't one. I mean, almost all languages you'll see are on there, but if you do speak one that isn't, you know, even if you don't get extra points, I still think it's useful just for understanding different cultures. That's always a useful thing as being in the Foreign Service.
All right, thanks a lot, guys.
Yeah. Any other questions?
I have a quick question for
Yes.
Joelle or Jason, if you have a moment. As I'm finishing up, I have another year and a half or so of graduate studies on policy side. I just wanted to know if there's one location. I know I jotted a few things down regarding the graduate programs or graduate internships or graduate positions. Any particular area, or go to the Facebook page just to kind of, you know, try to see where the deadlines are and stuff like that to make sure, you know, I'm on top of it for postings.
Yeah, so if you're getting a graduate degree already, then probably the two programs that would be of most interest to you would be the Pathways Recent Graduates Program
Yes.
or the Presidential Management Fellowship. I mean, those are two programs. They both lead to the civil service. So if you're interested in the Foreign Service, you know, those won't be ones of probably as much interest. But for both of those are basically designed for people who've already gotten the graduate degree or who are about to get it. So on the Foreign Service side, we do have the Pickering and the Wrangell programs, but those are designed for people who don't have a graduate degree yet. You can potentially use them to pay for a graduate degree, even if you already have one, but it would need to be something pretty different than what you already got a degree in, and you have to have a pretty good reason for it. So, but the PMF program, that deadline was back in October, and it's always, they start promoting it like in late August, excuse me, early September. Pathways Recent Graduates, it just kind of depends on when the positions become available. That's not on any particular schedule. They're just on an as needed basis. I put right above the PMF link, which is just pmf.gov, but right above the PMF link, I put a link for Pathways. Both includes information on Pathways internships and Pathways Recent Graduates. If you scroll down about 2/3 of the way down the screen, you'll see the link for Pathways Recent Graduates program. Depends on the agency. Department of State doesn't let you apply until actually you get the degree, but for some agencies, you can actually apply even a few months before you graduate. The main thing I would also say that I didn't mention in the main presentation about Pathways is that many agencies, including the Department of State, have a limit on the number of applications we will accept. So for a particular position, it might be 50 or 100 or 200. So if you are really interested in pathways, you want to make sure that you have your resume and everything and transcripts, everything ready in USA jobs. So that as soon as they go live, you can apply and make sure you meet that cap, right? And there are people out there, I'm not saying you should do this, but there are people out there who check every day at 9:01 p.m. To make sure that they get in before the, that they're there while there's still time to apply, because they can sometimes close pretty quickly. It depends on the agency again, and but in the particular position, but they can be quite popular. The only other program would be is if you are a veteran, then there is a Veterans Innovation Partnership Fellowship, which is very similar to the Presidential Management Fellowship, has a similar deadline also in September. I'm sorry, also in October, but they start advertising it usually in September.
Okay, no, I'm not a veteran. So
Okay.
that I didn't have the presidential written down, but I see what you're saying, and I can go to that. I can go to both of those links that you provided.
Yeah.
And take a peek there. And then in civil service, I know most positions are hired through Washington, DC. Some aren't, but mostly
Right.
it is, right?
Right. I mean, like, for example, the Los Angeles Passport Agency recently had a Pathways Recent Graduates opportunity, about a month ago or so. So you will see those primarily outside of Washington, D.C. It will be at the Passport Agency, or sometimes we have a financial center in Charleston, South Carolina. But the vast majority of positions that you will see on USA Jobs will be in Washington, D.C. Pathways, it's maybe not quite, I mean, it's a little bit more, outside of DC, just because the passport agencies do tend to use it a lot. But in general, for Department of State civil service employment, you'll be looking at Washington, DC area.
Okay, thank you. Yes.
Sure. And I think we have Jose. I don't know, Joelle, you want to add something?
I just want to add, and Jose, we'll get to you and then Ari next, but just one thing, Jason, maybe we should clarify a question which hasn't come up yet, but might. And that is that some people, a small percentage, I think, but I don't know, maybe you know better than I do, of civil service people do convert to foreign service later in their career. And there's also a small percentage of foreign service who convert to civil service. And I don't know if you could address that, but once you're in, you kind of do the thing that you're in for a while, but you're not stuck there forever. And maybe Jason could mention something about that.
Sure. I'll just say along those lines that absolutely people do convert both directions. There is a special program for converting from the civil service at the Department of State to the Foreign Service. It basically skips you ahead to the second phase of the Foreign Service officer selection process. So you don't have to take the Foreign Service officer test. But even if you didn't go through that particular program, of course you can, and that's usually after you've been in the department 7 years, that you can go through that program, although the requirements have changed various times, what the requirement is for that particular program. But of course, you can always just take the Foreign Service officer test or one of the Foreign Service specialist programs. You can just apply through the regular process too. And in fact, in my own case, I was in the civil service before I joined the Foreign Service, not at the Department of State, but I was in the civil service at the U.S. Department of Labor. And I just took the Foreign Service officer test. I think having the experience of working in the federal government was something that was, a positive, certainly, because at least I understood something about how the federal government works. And as it turned out, when I was at the Department of Labor, I had worked with the Department of State as well. So I had some knowledge, from the people I'd worked with about Department of State policies and practices too. So, especially because, and I didn't mention this yet, but the average age on entry for the Foreign Service officer career is 34. So not many people are coming in, at age like 22 right out of undergrad, for example, right? Most people have some other experience beforehand, and a civil service experience is very good type of background to have if if you want to, gain experience at Department of State or some other agency before applying. So Jose, I think you were next.
Yeah, I just want to say quickly, thank you for coming out and talking to us. I have a quick question regarding, I was looking at some of the qualifications, and one of them is that your immediate family members need to be U.S. citizens. And if we were to have one or two family members who aren't U.S. citizens, would that play a heavy role in our chances of actually getting a job at the Department of State?
Right. So it doesn't impact your application, right? As long as you are a U.S. citizen, you can apply. Now, what requirements there might be, or what restrictions might be placed, that could happen during the diplomatic security, the security clearance phase that Joelle mentioned, which comes later in the, after you're selected, you have the base, well, not after you're selected, after you pass the oral assessment in the Foreign Service Officer or Foreign Service Specialist case. Then you have the security clearance and the medical clearance that basically happen at the same time. So if you have more than one nationality, there could be restrictions placed on you, or there might be restrictions placed on you because of your family members too. But it doesn't stop you from applying as long as you have U.S. citizenship. And I would say too, if you have more than one citizenship, that's certainly fine as well. Again, though, that could be possible that they might say, well, you can't serve in the country where you have that other citizenship, or maybe where your spouse has that citizenship. Or they might, if you have more than one citizenship, they might ask you to renounce it potentially. It's kind of, there's not like a general rule there. It kind of depends on what the other country is. And but that would be addressed later. So please apply if you're interested. And then, the diplomatic security portion will come later. I don't know, Joelle, if you have anything else to add on that.
The only thing I would add is that numerous colleagues of ours who were single when they joined the Foreign Service ended up marrying a person of a different citizen, a person from a different country who had a different citizenship. And I can think of one example that I thought was kind of interesting is one of our colleagues married a Pakistani, started dating a Pakistani, and ultimately they got married. And that, I think she may have become a US citizen by now, but she certainly didn't have to. And so if you have family members who are not citizens, that wouldn't affect your employment opportunities at all. It could, unless one of your family members is like a convicted criminal, maybe that would affect you, but that wouldn't be contingent on their citizenship. That would be contingent on their criminal record. Ari, I think you were the next one.
Yeah, I can make this brief. I was just curious if you guys, or if you could both kind of touch on the most difficult aspect of your jobs on like kind of a day-to-day basis, rather than like maybe a specific big event that happened, but just day-to-day, what's the most difficult thing you do?
Joelle, you want to try that first?
Well, for me, the most difficult thing I do is go to meetings, like useless, boring meetings. I'm being very honest, because almost all of the job is interesting to me, and sitting around a table listening to people who are talking about things that don't have any relevance to me or my work is really boring. And so I find that really difficult. That's day to day. One other thing that's kind of difficult is moving every 3 years. The State Department hires a moving company to pack up all your stuff and move it. I mean, that's not difficult in the sense of the work part of the move, but it's hard to uproot after a few years and move to a new place and start again. I love it and I hate it. Do you know what I mean? Like I love learning new languages and living in different countries and making new friends. And for me, that's one of the coolest things about the Foreign Service. But the flip side of that is you have to say goodbye to those friends every 3 years, and you have to start over. And that's challenging. It's not, for me, it's not a difficulty, like, you weigh the pros and cons. To me, that's a con, but it's not greater than the pros. But meetings are even worse.
I would just say, I absolutely agree with Joelle. I often say that the moving is the best and worst part of the Foreign Service, because I'm really happy I got to live in all these different places and have all these amazing experiences. But of course, I had to move to get there. And the actual process of moving, as Joelle said, we probably have some of the best movers in the world, certainly the most experienced all over the world. But you still got to do it. You still got to look at your stuff and say, okay, what's going where, and watch the packers or help out the packers, that kind of thing. The other thing that I would say that is unique, I think, to the Foreign Service is that, and that was kind of a surprise to me in joining, was how much time you can end up spending with your coworkers. And that can be good or bad. But on my first post in Jamaica, there were 15 of us who was our first or second assignment. and we all worked in the consular section, which was in a separate building at the time. So we were all together all day, and then we almost all lived, in fact, maybe it was all of us, but certainly 14 out of 15, we all lived in the same building. So we saw each other a lot, and, people would have like parties or get together for dinner, and not that you always had to go, but it was kind of like you needed to go some of the time. And then two people were dating and then they broke up, and it caused all kinds of havoc among everybody. But, so there are things like that which you don't necessarily have at a regular job. I mean, a regular job, sure, maybe there's happy hours once in a while, but you're not seeing your coworkers all the time. Now that depends a little bit on the location, because in Hong Kong, there was so much going on in the expatriate community that people didn't really interact as much. And in San Diego, I mean, in Tijuana, you had San Diego right there, so people were doing more of their own thing. But in certain posts, particularly I would say in more remote locations, or in locations where it's harder to make local friends because people are always asking you about visas, then you probably are going to have a lot more interactions with your coworkers, which can be great. But if there's a problematic coworker among them, that can be more difficult. So
Great, thank
Alexander, I
you.
think, is next.
Hi there. Yeah, so I'm going to be actually graduating next semester with my master's in public administration. And I know that there's the foreign service exam. Do you have any like advice on how to prepare for those exams?
Sure. So for the Foreign Service Officer test, we have a practice test, which I would strongly urge you to take. It's available both on our website and also on our app. And when you take it, it'll give you a idea of where you need to prepare. It'll tell, because the test is quite comprehensive. I mean, it includes things that you might expect, like, international affairs, civics, things like that. But it also includes, math and IT. So that when you take the test, it'll tell you where you need to prepare. So we also have, and I'm going to put the link here for that test in the chat in just a second. But we also have a reading list, which I would recommend you look at. Now, it's quite long, so you don't need to read everything on the list, of course. But what's nice about the list is that it's kind of geared to the test, right? In the sense that the test will tell you where you need to, what you need to prepare, and then you can go look at the reading list and you'll see, okay, I need to work on my, I don't know, and my English language skills or my math skills or something. You can go there and you can find books that will help you with those particular subjects. Then I mentioned the reading list. I'll put the link for that as well. The main thing I would say about the reading list is definitely don't feel like you have to read everything on it. But I would say that keeping up with international affairs is particularly important. So, nothing against the Los Angeles Times, but, probably reading something like The Economist or the Wall Street Journal or Financial Times, New York Times, Washington Post, something like that. Not necessarily all of them, but something else to keep up with what's happening in the world, I would also recommend. Well, Joelle, if you have anything else to add.
The only thing I would add is if you're actually interested in the Foreign Service, like for real, just not to be discouraged when you fail the test, because a lot of people fail the test. I think they pass something like, I don't know, 10% of the people who take the exam, or some small number like that. And so I know we have colleagues who took the test multiple times before they passed it, and now they're like rock star Foreign Service officers. It just was a test. The test was hard, and they didn't pass it. So I think, if you're interested, you should everybody should do the practice test just for fun. And then if you take the test and fail it, you take it again. It's lots of people, most people fail it. And that's doesn't mean that you're not going to be an amazing ambassador someday.
Yeah, and it's free. So, there's really no downside to taking it besides the time that you have to take to prepare. But and you can only take it once a year, but again, many people do take it multiple times. And once you're in, nobody cares. It's not like they're going to judge you based on, well, that person took it five times versus that person took it once. Nobody's even going to know, really.
Thank you.
Sure. So we have about 5 minutes left. I'm going to put the tiny URL in the chat here again, but I will also stop the recording here in a second. So that way, if anybody does want to ask a question without it being recorded, they'll have a chance to do so. And so let me just put in that tiny URL one more time. I will stop the recording.